Hello and welcome to the Plant Paradigm Podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with amazing people from all around the world and look for ways to create a clean, green, and sustainable future for us, the planet, and all beings. I'm your host, Tom Simak, a fellow plant eater who strives to optimize every living ecosystem, passionate about looking after this beautiful floating rock we call home and all the lovely creatures that dwell among it. Thank you for joining us for another episode. Today's chat is jam-packed with amazing stories. We're talking with Rebecca Knowles. Rebecca founded Farmers for Stock-Free Farming, an organization helping farmers transition into ethical business models completely devoid of any animal use. We'll get into what they do and some success stories and all the different variables that come into play when we're talking about stock-free farming and why it's a necessary move for the future of our planet and its longevity. This conversation took place a few months ago, and when I touched base with her just a few weeks ago, she was actually busy writing letters to members of the Scottish Parliament asking them to acknowledge the fact that even if rapid action were to be taken in reducing the emissions in all the livestock sectors, would only result in a 19% drop in emissions, compared with restoring vegetation and rewilding the land, which would sequester the equivalent of 35.5 years of Scottish CO2 emissions. We're going to be touching a lot on the rewilding of Scottish lands, and a lot of this can be implemented on a global scale. For the visually inclined, this video does go up on the YouTubes, so if you wanted to watch our Zoom chat, by all means, feel free. But without further ado, I'm really excited to share this conversation. Here is Rebecca and I. Rebecca, welcome to the podcast. How are you going?
Fine, thank you. Very well.
That's amazing. Have you had a chance to have your morning coffee?
Yeah, I've had my cuppa and some brekkie, so I'm good to go.
Oh, good to go. What was on the menu today?
Well, I always have blueberries every morning.
And every morning?
Every morning, and I eat them with all bran, which is a high fiber cereal, and oat yogurt, so plain yogurt and oat milk.
What a mix. Yeah. So you got those prebiotics in there, probiotics, got the antioxidants. You're going to literally not age. So,
well, some would differ with you there, but okay.
I mean, you go as long as you can go. You can always push the boundaries, can't you?
Yeah.
Look, what's been happening in the world of stock-free farming lately?
Well, lots have been going on, really. We're really excited about Farmers for Stock-Free Farming. The idea really came from our political lobbying. Last year, we were doing quite a lot of political lobbying. And I run another group called Vegan Outreach Scotland, and we were active politically, mostly because of all the research that came out in 2018 about the need to reduce the environmental impact of our food system and how a plant-based diet was really topping the charts there as being, the diet that could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 70%, 73%. So we felt this was huge. So we got out there, we were meeting with politicians, our MSPs, as we call them in Scotland, our members of the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah.
And we were in one meeting, and one MSP said to us, do you know what? If we shift to plant-based production, plant-based consumption, you're going to put 60% of Scottish farmers out of business. And we disagreed, but of course it sort of stopped us in our tracks as well. And we thought we have to show that this is not accurate. Because I think that's a very commonly held view. If you talk to people in the street about shifting to a plant-based diet, they're going to say, oh, well, what about the farmers? Farming is such a huge tradition over here. So I suppose Farmers for Stock-Free Farming was our rebuttal, to that MSP. But it was also something that, I bought the domain about 5 years ago, and it's been something very much on my mind. So we wanted to show that it could be done. And there's many reasons to do it, many reasons why we have to do it. And we came up with our 3 roads to stock-free farming, which are growing crops for human consumption, ecosystem restoration, and entering into diversification initiatives, which are sort of non-traditional
Mm.
agricultural initiatives. So those are our three roads.
You know what's so fascinating about that? I just had a conversation with Geraldine Stark, who runs Refarmed, which
Oh,
essentially
yes.
she helps convert mainly dairy farmers to kind of run an animal sanctuary and then produce currently oat milk, but that might change in the future. But what's so funny about what she said, which is just what you touched on, is a lot of these dairy farmers actually want to get out of the trade. And when you're purchasing, dairy milk, which let's be honest, 99% of the population go to a supermarket to get all their goods. So when you go to the supermarket and you're trying to support a farmer, they don't get to choose the price. They don't get to choose the shipping method, the transport. And a lot of the times, these wholesalers, I guess, these mass supermarkets can pull them in any direction that they want because they take up such a big part of their business. So
Mhm.
if you want to support farmers and if you're true to that, I think firstly, you don't need to be consuming, dairy milk or other animals. You need to be actually going directly to the farmer so you can give them options in a way that can support them.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a big part of our motivation is we know that farms in this country, most farms in this country do not make a profit at all. I mean, over 80% of farm business income in Scotland is subsidy. So it's public funded money, it's taxpayers' money that are paying for these farmers to continue business as usual on their farms, farming sheep, farming beef, and the rest. So, we know they're not making any money. So we wanted to offer some viable financial alternatives too.
Mm,
Sheep farmers, beef farmers in sort of what's category three in Scotland, sort of the rough grazing areas, on average make a loss. I think it's £27,400 a year loss without subsidy.
huge, huge.
So it's an economical disaster. So it beggars belief that the government are not looking at options here to do something about that. Yeah.
Do you know if like the farmers that grow like your vegetables, do they get subsidies from the government as well?
It's very, very small. They say that only 1% of subsidies go to growing fruit and veg. And actually, the farmers who are growing fruit and vegetables, they're the exemption to the rule. They are actually making a profit when you
Right,
put farm
right, yeah.
business in. Those are the ones making a profit. And yet so little money goes into subsidizing them. So we know that growing food for human consumption does actually work and it does bring in money. Um, but there's a lack of political will, there's a lack of government support, a lack of direction for farmers to shift, a lack of incentive for farmers to shift at this point.
That's such a shame. And it almost seems economically backwards for the country because I'm assuming it's kind of just they're stuck in this paradigm of no, it's the old way, and they're not allowing themselves to grow with the market as everything else has changed. And I don't
Mhm.
know what the profitability of animal like butchers and all that kind of stuff was like 100 years ago. I'd be curious to know if it was like actually profitable in any sort of way. But I feel like across the board globally, it's the same situation. All these meat, dairy, and egg industry gets subsidies from the government. I don't know why exactly this is happening, whether it's to support like old ways or old systems. It just seems so backwards, ironically.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple of things. One is yes, because we've always done it this way, so to support business as usual, and also to support what they call rural economies. So there's a big thing, especially in Scotland, which is sort of underpopulated, that we have to support rural economies. But we've come up with some other ways that that can be done without using
Right.
taxpayers' money to continue to support things that are destroying the planet, such as beef and sheep.
Okay.
So I think it's partly business as usual, partly tradition, and partly just political fear because the meat industry and the dairy industry are big supporters of the government. The government has their own public bodies like Quality Meat
Mm,
Scotland that
yeah.
promotes the consumption of Scotch beef and Scottish lamb.
Yeah, it's such a shame. But let's go into these reasons of stock-free farming that we've touched on a little bit. And I know you've got quite a comprehensive I guess not comprehensive, but quite a large array of almost guides or information pieces on the website if anyone does want to check that out. But we've kind of touched on the first one, which is like combat financial uncertainty. It's just it's not profitable, and I think we've made that point pretty clear. But I wanted to look at number 2 because I think it's something quite interesting, which is satisfy governmental requirements. What does that mean?
Well, basically, the government talks the talk about, for example, climate change mitigation. And this year, the Scottish government has pledged, I think, £40 million to the Agricultural Transformation Programme, a programme that is stated to be there to help farmers shift to more environmentally sustainable farming. But so far, we haven't really seen much of that actually being put into action. And also the government, you probably heard this expression, public funding for public goods, public money for public goods. So
Yep.
instead of just subsidizing things that are detrimental to the planet, they want to subsidize things that actually have a green outcome. So whether that's, ecosystem restoration, a more viable form of farming, that the government is stating they're only going to fund things that have public goods at the other end that are beneficial to the planet and the people. So I think these are the stated government requirements, but a lot of things are stated and not really meant. So, for example, our government declared a climate emergency last year. We set these really stringent climate mitigation goals in Scotland to be net zero by 2045. Yet, on the other hand, the government's pushing meat and dairy consumption like there's no connection there. And we know the very high impacts of ruminant meat. They're up to 100 times higher than the impacts of plant-based foods. And yet the government is completely ignoring science. But on paper, this would satisfy government requirements if we could engage in farming that reduces emissions, that's better for the planet, that's better for biodiversity, that's better for public health, and that keeps rural economies afloat and even thriving.
For sure. Do you know what kind of businesses or I guess initiatives these governments are looking at? Are we looking at like more renewables as well, like that kind of whole sector, like hydro electricity, or are they looking to actually support the farmers in these rural areas to grow or I guess restore the land? Do you know what kind of initiatives they're after?
I haven't seen anything clearly outlined as yet. I mean, this was sort of announced at the beginning of lockdown, and I think maybe
Right.
COVID-19 has probably taken precedence
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
anything. So it could be out there, but I have not yet seen a plan. I've heard them, Fergus Ewing, our rural economies minister, says a plan will be outlined. We'll get a plan, but I think possibly details might be on hold until later.
I wonder, I think, I just hope it's not always going to be later, like maybe next year, maybe next year, maybe
as we
next
go
decade.
in and out of lockdown. Yeah, I know. Yeah. But
Um,
that's a very good question. And at some point, we as a lobbying group are going to have to, hold them to it,
we'll let you do that and update us on that one. But let's look at number 3, meat changing consumer demands. So this one's an interesting one, and I'm sure we're kind of seeing it at the moment, regardless of where you are in the world. You see some level of this. What's your thought on this one?
Absolutely. And, we're talking here about the increase in the number of people who are opting to eat a plant-based diet, who are becoming vegan, whether that is for the animals, for the planet, or for their own health. So, for example, the number of vegans in Britain quadrupled between 2014 and 2019. So we've
Good on
really
you,
seen
Britain.
an explosion. Yes. Yeah, yay! And the market research group Finder is predicting that 12 million people in Britain are going to be meat free by the end of 2020. That's the end of this year. So at some point, production's going to have to meet these changes in consumer demand. And to us, to the plan that we've laid out with Farmers to Stock Free Farming, that does not include imports. I mean, I think there's a big myth out there that if you eat a vegan diet, you're relying on these imports that have a high carbon footprint or detrimental to the environment. And that's not the plan we're going with Farmers to Stock Free Farming. We're going with a plan that leads us towards self-sufficiency and being, more secure in our food production.
Mm.
So that's absolutely not true. Yeah, so the public is changing. We see things that plant milk sales are rising, um, consumption of dairy is falling, and so farmers have to, change in order to meet these demands. And I think it's beginning to happen on a very small scale.
And I think what's really cool about this topic is that the studies are so consistent. Like one that came out that Alan Ramos from ProVeg, who I just had on, he talked about this study that said by 2040, 60% of the total food market is actually going to be plant-based alternatives or cell-based meats. I'm like, that is
Fantastic.
an
Yeah.
increase of 55%, which I mean goes hand in hand with the changing consumer demands because every
Hmm.
year it's just more like even if you just walk into the supermarket, if you want to see something like literally in front of you, every time, like we have Coles and Woolworths here in Australia, and I kid you not, I go shopping once a week, and every time I go, there's at least 2 to 3 new products on the shelf. Had not
Yeah.
seen before, had not heard of before, but a new product. And that's, I think, across the board. I mean, I'm sure it's quite similar in the UK. I'm sure it's similar in US and all across Europe. I mean, do you find that kind of the same with where you are?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's new things coming out all the time, and vegans posting them excitedly on Facebook, going,
Yeah.
look at this. And we're like, yes. And what's interesting is it's our big supermarket chains like Sainsbury's and Waitrose who are doing the market research here and predicting,
Mm.
that the future is vegan, and they're changing their products accordingly. But the government's not doing it.
Yeah.
The
Well,
government's
they've got to
still
make
just
the business
pushing.
decision.
Yeah, they're still just doing business as usual. Meanwhile, retail is moving on, the public has moved on. And so we're going to get this gap between production and consumption that's going to be quite scary at some point, I think.
For sure. But it would be nice to see that switch every day, just 2 to 3 products. That's all we ask for. And that's all we're seeing, which is great.
Yeah.
Look, you did mention Farmers for Stock-Free Farming a few times in there. We did give you you did say a bit of an update on how that came into fruition. Can you give us a bit of I guess, what it actually is currently? Like, what is the aim and goal and use of Farmers for Stock-Free Farming?
Yeah, definitely. Our aim, we have a couple of aims here. One is to attract farmers who are looking or considering transitioning to something else. So farmers who are hearing this message of changing consumer demands, climate change, and even with the whole stuff about COVID and the connection to factory farming and the connection to meat consumption, all of these things threaten farmers' stability. So we really are trying to call in these farmers and appeal to them and offer them an alternative. So we've recently submitted a grant to become a stock-free advisory service. So we're quite excited about that. We're hoping to get that.
And what will
We've
that
had,
mean for you guys?
well, for example, we've been contacted by a crofter who lives in the Western Isles, and he wants to do something else with his croft. Currently, he's growing silage for his neighbor's cows,
Hmm.
but he himself is actually vegetarian, and he's like, "Hey, I'd
Oh,
like to do
yeah.
something else." So, we could go and meet with him. The idea is we go meet with him and come up with a plan. In fact, I've already sent him a plan for what he could do with his croft instead of um, growing silage for the neighbor. So we have various backgrounds. My background is agriculture. I have a degree in agriculture and worked on a sheep farm, worked in a market garden way back in the day, and then I've
Yeah.
since gone into other careers. So, so between us, we have quite a mixed background. We have one lady in the group who's really an ecologist and an expert in vegan permaculture. So we have various resources we can draw on to help attract and help come up with good plans for farmers who want to transition.
So like a
One thing we're
lifeline
working
almost.
Well, hopefully that would be nice. One thing we're working on right now, and it's almost done, is a survey of farmers and crofters. Basically, it's a survey that goes out, and there's a video, an informational video in the middle of it that's about 8 minutes, and it presents the case for stock-free farming, basically. And it also presents our three roads to stock-free farming: the growing crops for human consumption. If you've got the kind of land, if you've got cropland, it's about shifting to growing crops for human consumption on that land. If you've got pasture, permanent pasture, rough grazing, it's about letting that rewild, letting that grow, and planting trees if you can. And the third one is looking at diversifying into the non-traditional agricultural activities. So to give you an example of how that works, so we do have a crofter in Sutherland, which is way up north in Scotland. And so she has an 80-acre croft, which is deemed by the government only suitable for sheep and cattle, so only suitable for grazing.
Okay.
And on that croft, she has planted 312 hardy hybrid hazelnut trees. And she's hoping in 3 to 4 years' time to be able to harvest about 12 kilos of hazelnuts per tree. And she sent me a picture recently. She only planted them in February, and some of the trees are already in nuts. And she sent me a picture of these nut trees. So, and she's already got a couple of market outlets for that. So that's the growing crops for human consumption. Then her croft is very beautiful. So the biggest part of it, she's letting it rewild. And the former owner had cows, but now that the cows are gone, she's really seeing this amazing array of biodiversity. And the ecosystem is really coming back, and she's just letting that rewild, which is a huge win for sort of carbon capture, is letting the trees come back, letting the seed banks grow. And then finally, what she's doing is Gina's she's a construction expert. So now she's building a glamping pod,
Awesome.
the first of several, I think, so that she can also supplement the income with tourism. So that's her doing all three of our roads to stock-free farming, and potentially supporting herself. She was ineligible for any subsidies from the government simply because she was not farming livestock.
So
which
sad.
is an absolute tragedy, and that is a real stumbling block, and that is something that we're going to be lobbying about. Is you're not only you're not helping people to transition, you're blocking them.
That's so, I wonder, if someone had gone to one of those three pathways that we were describing, and if they were still making a loss, they wouldn't get any subsidies, or they'd get quite a small amount,
Well, she tried to get subsidies but couldn't. So all I can
anything.
say there is,
my gosh,
as far as I know, there's nothing. Now, her neighbor, one option is reforestation, of course. So either, and I'll give you some great stats later on this and how much it helps meet our climate change goals. But her neighbor went through the forestry grant scheme, which is a Scottish government scheme, and he planted 22,000 native oak, Scots pine and birch, I believe it was, and he receives a subsidy for that. I mean, it's not very much. It's something like £4,000 a year for 5 years. So there's some money there for actively planting trees. But not every farmer.
22,000 trees. No one can, you know what I mean? No average Joe can just go and plant that amount. That is, I mean, I don't know what kind of equipment he must have, but that is a gargantuan effort for such a low subsidy. In my mind, I'm just that is just not good enough.
Well, it gets worse. So fortunately, the Forestry Commission comes in and plants the trees. They come in with their equipment, so that's the good part. But you have to fund the entire thing up front yourself, and then you get the money back after. So he went into debt by about £70,000 to actually do this, and it nearly broke the bank. So once again, the government don't make it easy for people who are not willing to take on that amount of debt or aren't debt worthy. That door is closed. So not good.
Well, that just does not add up. That's not okay. Not okay.
Not okay.
But I mean, look, you did mention that you had some facts on climate change and the mitigation of that. We've got point 4 and 5 are quite similar, which is reduce environmental impact and mitigate climate change. We all know that, animal agriculture is pretty bad for the environment. But let's look into the climate change mitigation that you were talking about.
Yeah. So there was a survey that came out in 2019 from Harvard Law School by Helen Harwart and Matthew Hayek. I don't know if you've seen it. This one is really awesome. And it basically looked at Britain and broke it down into England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and said that, our existing cropland, the cropland that exists in Britain right now, we're currently using 55% of that cropland is being used to produce animal feed.
Animal
Right?
feed. Oh my gosh.
Animal feed. Yeah. So we're using less than half of our cropland to grow crops for human consumption.
Mm-hmm.
If, however, we used all our existing cropland, didn't expand it, but just used all of our existing cropland to grow crops for human consumption, we can feed every single person in the UK, including enough protein, enough nutrients, enough calories, right? So we've got enough land basically to be self-sufficient. Then with the pasture land, the permanent grassland, the grazing land, if we rewild that, if we let that go back to nature, that obviously becomes a great source for sequestering carbon, because nothing sequesters carbon like a tree, right?
Mm.
And so the climax vegetation of the UK, in other words, the vegetation that would eventually come back if we just leave it alone, is trees. People think, oh, England's green and pleasant land, it's fields. It's not fields, it's fields because our ancestors chopped down all the trees,
Yeah.
So if we let the trees come back, that would sequester carbon dioxide to the tune of offsetting 9 years of total CO2 emissions for the UK. So that would be an incredible win for carbon capture. Now, if we look at the same figures in Scotland, because Scotland has so much pasture land, if we were to allow all the grazing land and permanent pasture in Scotland to rewild, just leave it alone, that would sequester the equivalent of 35 and a half years of total Scottish carbon dioxide emissions.
I can't even fathom that huge, that is a massive amount of carbon dioxide.
It's massive. And so that would be a huge win. And we're not even saying to farmers, crofters, plant trees. We're just saying, leave it alone. Leave it alone.
Don't do a thing.
And let it do its thing. I mean, maybe in areas that have been heavily grazed and the seed banks have been depleted, we would need to plant trees. But just leaving it alone. So obviously we need to pay farmers to do that. And one thing is to sort of redirect subsidies we've submitted a parliamentary question to the Scottish Government saying, what is your plan? What is your current or future plan to pay farmers to rewild their land in order to help meet our climate change goals? And another exciting idea that came out in an article I read in The Conversation last week was actually inviting corporations and businesses to buy carbon credits to offset their carbon footprint.
Right, yeah.
So, you take a big oil company like Shell or something, or even private individuals who fly a lot for business and say, okay, we've got 30 acres of a croft up here, in Sutherland. Would you like to pay this farmer to rewild it, to plant trees, and then that offsets some of your carbon, so you can go home and feel better about yourself,
Oh, for sure. Like and I think, this is something I talked a lot about this with a DJ called DJ Tiger Lily in Australia. She got a lot of crap, like as being a vegan activist, because she had to travel to play her music. But she offset all her carbon by buying back forestry in Australia. So she did the exact same model, but just down under. So I think it's something a lot of businesses as well, I think, are leaning towards that direction. I mean, I can only speak, from Melbourne, and sometimes I see stickers at the front of these businesses saying we are fully carbon neutral. And then they put the website in which they donate their money. So you can actually track the dollars that go in, which is phenomenal. And I think, what a great shift that businesses are doing, because I think 20 years ago, this would have been unheard of.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we weren't nearly in as bad of a position.
Exactly. Oh, we were, but we didn't know about it.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. Let me reiterate that.
I think that's a great idea. And so even though the government's dragging their feet, we're confident we can do it ourselves. If the private sector engages with this, it's like, screw the government. stay there playing with your dinosaurs. We're going to do this anyway, kind of thing. So,
That's a great quote right there. No,
yeah,
that's so awesome how that's kind of where this is all leaning towards. And I wonder because when you look at like governments in the way that they run, they're all looking after themselves. Basically, you need to make sure that this nationalistic ideology where this nation has to be looked after economically, it has to be quite a very strong foundation. And I wonder if that direction of, hey, we can be fully self-sufficient in our own land. We don't have to import nor export. We could probably fund all farmers fairly, and that money would then go back into the economy. I wonder what I can imagine that it would be, to get that started, would be quite a short-term detriment. Like economically, you'd have to pay like a fair bit, but over like 5, 10 or 15 or 20 years, you'd be like the most thriving nation in the world.
yeah. And what would the reason be for not doing that? When you think about it, why not do that? And you would think a political party like the Scottish National Party would be dead keen to do that. Um, yeah, but the economic disturbance, like you say, Scottish beef is big, Scottish lamb is big. But I'm like, look, hey, we'll let you keep the whiskey. Let's just get rid of the beef and the lamb,
Yes. Well, I wonder if it's just us telling them to actually do their job. Because if you think about it, I think it was 1914, the Black Plague came around Europe, and 25 to 50% of the European population just died, but not a single king lost his position, right? And then, but if someone were to go around town, sharing blasphemy and saying all this bad crap about any religion that this nation had followed, and that king didn't kill that person, he'd be dethroned. So it was just that the point is the perspective of all these people were killed by this Black Plague, but the king was not held accountable. So I
Yes.
think the shift that has to happen is we have to make our political leaders accountable for the absolute treachery that's going on, because they can say it's not their fault, but everyone's got a voice and everyone can further the cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, just the fact that we know meat consumption is bad for our health, and the whole connection, the World Health Organization, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the World Organization for Animal Health have all said that our demand for animal protein is one of the main risk factors of a pandemic. And they said this years and years and years ago. And yet our government is still pushing the consumption of animal products and still funding that, and causing us, the innocent taxpayer, to plow our money into it too. So we're actually paying ourselves for the stuff that's killing us. Yeah, we have written to the government about this. We have pointed this out. Got a letter back from my MP saying, thank you for your radical suggestions.
Radical suggestions, yeah.
I'm like, yeah, growing vegetables is really radical.
It's kind of almost like isn't it like the surfer dudes that are kind of like a radical, bro? Like, it's like, doesn't that also mean like cool? I don't know. It could be thinking of the wrong word.
Yeah, I should probably write back and thank him. Yeah, but
no, don't do it.
Yeah.
We touched on a fair few points. I mean, on your list, like increase food self-sufficiency. We know that it'd be more efficient, restoring ecosystems and biodiversity. We touched on that in terms of rewilding the land. Let's talk about improving public health. What do you mean about that one?
Well, there we're talking about, all the research on the consumption of animal products and the connections to heart disease, diabetes, obesity, which is a huge problem in Scotland. We know that the consumption of meat is not good for our health. So we don't eat enough fruit and vegetables. I mean, I got a letter back from Cabinet Secretary for Climate Change and the Environment, and she admitted that we do not eat enough fruit and vegetables in Scotland. 2/3 of Scottish people are obese. So the shift to a plant-based diet. overweight or obese, I should say. So the shift to a plant-based diet, a high fiber diet with fruit and vegetables and protein crops would be way, way healthier. The connections with dairy and cancers. Our ancestors ate 800 varieties of fruit and vegetables. And currently now in the UK, 91% of our cropland is taken up with just 7 crops. That's
Right.
how limited we've become in our vision. And most of those crops are crops that are fed to livestock. So, it's ridiculous. So expanding our diet. And there's been some great research in Scotland. Aberdeen University, the Rowett Institute has done a lot of research into plant protein crops. This is very exciting, bringing back things like the fava bean, lupins. I don't know if you know what lupins are. They're these beautiful blue flowers.
No. And you
Lupini
eat them.
beans, they grow. Yeah, lupini beans have like 26 grams of protein per cup. You
Whoa.
see them growing by the side of the road. Hemp is an amazing crop. There's a push right now to bring back hemp, and the British Hemp Alliance is trying to remove the obstacles to having a thriving hemp industry. I mean, hemp has been grown for thousands of years. It was the most important crop grown, basically. It was used for fuel, food, clothing, and shelter. Basically, all the basic human needs are taken care of by hemp. And it grows great in Scotland. I mean, in the history books, they show that it was even grown on the Western Isles, the Isle of Lewis, the Isle of Islay. When Henry VIII was king, he ordered everybody to grow hemp because he was trying to get rope for his navy, to
Oh,
defeat the
cool.
French and all of that. So it grew everywhere, and then it became demonized in the 1920s, 1930s in the US. By the oil industry barons who, hemp can be used to make 2 kinds of biofuel, environmentally friendly biofuel. And Henry Ford, the automobile maker, actually made a car out of hemp, and
What?
other plant fibers. Yeah, and it had 10 times the impact strength of steel. This is
Insane.
incredible.
Well, you know what's so funny? I had this conversation with someone about the power of hemp because I'd never heard of it, a few months ago.
Really?
Well, no, you hear of hemp and, I have my hemp seeds in my smoothie, but that's like the apex of my knowledge. That's all I knew. And then he said, like, you can build houses out of these. I'm like, what?
Hmm.
And then I looked into it and there's actually companies in Australia, like in Tasmania, some of the houses are built from hemp. In
Oh,
WA, like
fantastic.
we've got a heap of houses. There's actually construction companies that just build from hemp.
Oh, I'm going to
And
look at that.
oh my,
Tasmania, huh?
yeah, Tasmania, they do a lot of their houses from hemp, and there's a few companies just devoted to making hemp concrete and hemp bricks. And
Yeah.
it's actually it insulates so much better. So although it's the same price
Mhm.
as like a conventional brick here, over the span of like, I did a study of 4 or 5 years, it actually saves money because they're so much better insulated than brick. It
Mhm.
was like 6
Yeah.
times more insulated. So if you're having a house that hopefully lasts more than 5 years, it would be such a loss to not make it from hemp. And then like it
Yeah.
just blew my freaking, and it's fireproof. I haven't looked into the fireproof part, but apparently you can put like a flamethrower because it's so dense and it won't burn it. And
Oh my gosh.
France has been making houses from hemp for the last 50 years.
It's
Where's this
incredible. I mean,
information?
I know exactly. And there's a company in the Scottish borders who's actually making insulation panels out of hemp for construction, and then hempcrete is the concrete version. And the only reason it maybe costs the same right now is because we're not growing enough of it. Once we
Yeah,
start growing it
it'll be
where we
cheaper.
can, the great thing about hemp is it's a marginal crop, so it doesn't compete for the best farmland. So we could even expand into some of these areas where nothing at all is being grown, and like the Western Isles where they're basically just doing sheep now. But we could grow hemp there because we know it was before. Very high in protein. It's almost as much protein as soy, and it's the only food to hold, the essential amino acids in balance with the essential fatty acids for human consumption. So, it's very nutritional. The seed can be used to make burgers, milk, of course, cheese, yogurt, protein bars, protein powder. And there's now a Scottish hemp group that I have joined, that is trying to sort of bring back hemp. And we have five farmers in this area in Aberdeenshire are now growing hemp. So there's so many possibilities. And even, I don't know if you've heard of a polycrub. Have you heard of a polycrub?
A polycrub?
Yes.
No, I haven't. What's this?
No.
Educate me,
All
Rebecca.
right, a polycrub is a hybrid of a greenhouse and a polytunnel. So they were made on the island of Shetland. Shetland is a group of islands most northerly to the United Kingdom. They're really out there.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got heck of a wind up there, and the polycrub is storm strength built. I'll be putting them up on our website soon. It can withstand storm and high winds. And basically, so people on the islands now, I saw them, I've just been in Harris, the Isle of Harris, Isle of Lewis. I saw a lot of these things where people are growing their vegetables in these polycrubs. So, as my granny used to say, where there's a will, there's a way,
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, everything all plants adapt to the natural environment, all things except humans, really.
Right.
It's like a flower thing that looks like wheat, like that's tall kind of thing.
Sorry, what is the hemp, you mean?
The polycrub.
Oh, the polycrub. No, it's made of sort of very rigid plastic, I suppose. So interesting. There's lots that we can do. And these protein crops that I was talking about, there's a company down in England called Hodmer Dodds. And we're growing lentils in England now. We're growing quinoa in England. Of course, peas and beans have always grown here. Lots of plant proteins, resurrecting the field bean. I forgot what the proper name is, but field beans were typically only fed to livestock, but Hodmer Dodds has resurrected them for human consumption. And so there's a lot going on with producing our own protein as well as fruit and vegetables.
Oh, for sure. And you did mention fava beans before. Quick shout out to fava beans.
Fava beans, yeah.
I don't know how
field beans, fava beans.
Is that the same? Field beans, fava beans?
It's the same. Yeah, it's the same. Mm-hmm.
I've stopped my snacking a little bit to just fruits if I have to, or fava beans. And I don't know whether roasted fava beans are any good for you, but if you're someone who snacks on like chocolates or lollies, trying to switch that to fava beans worked like a charm for me. So numero uno.
Yeah. They sell them dried, like dried here. Hodmer Dodds sells them dried. In fact, fava beans are different from runner beans in that you don't harvest them when they're, right at harvest. You let them dry actually in the pod, and then you harvest them. So quite interesting. Yeah.
Look, we've basically smashed through those 10 ways in kind of roundabout ways. Yeah, I think so. The last one's from me to we, but this whole time I think we've been talking about how this is quite like a global issue and how we band together to kind of solve this. So I actually wanted to use the remainder of our time to talk about some of these case studies because I read through them and they're freaking amazing. Can you talk about some of your favorite ones that you've got going on?
Yeah, well, I already talked about Gina Bates. Gina is Highland Veganics. She's the lady who's doing all three of our 3 roads. She's the one with the hazelnuts, also rewilding a lot of her land for carbon capture, and she's building these glamping pods. So really like that one. The kelp crofting, I don't know if you saw the kelp crofting folks. They are on the Isle of Skye. I've just been over there last week too. The kelp is seaweed, right?
Yep.
So this used to be a massive industry in the Western Isles. Came to an end about 200 years ago with the end of the Napoleonic Wars. But basically, back then, kelp has always been used by the islanders to fertilize their crops. So it's a great source of fertilizer. And of course, it's very rich in nutrients. Kelp has 10 times the calcium of cow's milk. So it's the richest food in calcium and iodine and a bunch of nutrients. So the islanders have always used kelp to fertilize their fields. And then the kelp industry involved burning the kelp in what are called kelp kilns and using the ash to bleach linen and make glass. And other chemicals. So this was sort of going on maybe 300 years ago, and it actually employed 10,000 families on the Western Isles were involved in the kelp industry. And then with the end of the Napoleonic Wars, when import tariffs were dropped, of course, the same old story, cheaper imports come in, and the industry collapsed, and that had quite a lot. It fed into the highland clearances. People became sort of economic migrants, and the industry disappeared. But I was over on Harris last week, and you can see the remains of these old kelp kilns where they burnt the kelp. So these three focused on Skye are sort of resurrecting the kelp industry. They're not going to harvest wild kelp because kelp is so important for marine ecosystems. It's sort of the foundation of marine ecosystems. So they've actually, on their croft, they seeded kelp in recycled fish tanks that they got on eBay, and then they're going to secure it to the bottom of the sea on secure rope lines. And when they harvest the kelp, they've got polytunnels on their croft. They're going to dry it in polytunnels. So they've got several markets. Kelp can be used to make sort of biodegradable plastics or a biodegradable alternative to plastics. They're going to contract with a company called Oceana, who makes these biodegradable plastics. Also, like I said, kelp for fertilizer. Food supplements. Obviously, kelp noodles. It's a really sought after health supplement, health and beauty. And using it for alcohol too. I was on the Isle of Harris and I bought a bottle of Isle of Harris gin.
Made from kelp.
It's infused with sugar kelp, with sugar kelp, which is a kind of kelp that these folks are growing. It's one of the main botanicals in the Isle of Harris gin. Highly recommend it to you. You can look up the Isle of Harris distillery online and order yourself a bottle. They ship it. Very good.
That's awesome. And what's so cool about kelp, I did watch a documentary about it, about like I think kelp's the one that actually sequesters a lot of carbon, and it grows ridiculously quick. Like we're talking I think it was like 2 feet a day. Like it was just
grows very, very quickly. Yeah, it's a climate change champ because it's not actually classed as a plant, it's classed as a tree because it performs the same function underground as trees do on land in sequestering carbon. So it also cleans the water. You know, when you've got agricultural runoff and excessive nutrients in the water, or from fish farms, which there's a lot of those around our coastline, kelp absorbs these nutrients and therefore sort of cleans the water. So excellent plant. That's one thing I forgot to say about hemp, actually. Hemp is a real climate change champ. Hemp sequesters 4 times as much carbon as trees in its short sort of 12 to 14 growing cycle. So it's another real champ there. So that's the kelp crofting is really, really interesting one. I'm really excited about that. Yeah, another one that I interviewed just a couple of weeks ago before I went on hold, so I haven't written it up yet, is the artisan grower. This is an establishment in Aberdeenshire where they're growing food. So they're veganic. They don't use any animal products or any sprays or anything on their farm. They're actually amending their soil with seaweed, so fertilizing with seaweed, rock dust, right? Minerals come from rocks.
Yeah.
And lucerne, which is a legume, supplying about 36 hotels and putting out right now about 150 veg boxes during lockdown. They produce these microgreens. Microgreens are supposed to have 40 times the nutrients of the fully grown plants. So they've got microgreens, they've got edible flowers, they've got loads of veggies. So I was chatting to Robert on the phone, and I'm like, my gosh, how many acres do you guys have out there? You want to take a guess?
I'm thinking you're thinking low, so I'm going to say like 5.
1.
What?
1 acre. Yeah. 1 acre, 35 to 36 hotels, and currently doing 150 veg boxes. So it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. Do you know how many dairy cows you can have on 1 acre of pasture?
Is it like 20?
Half a cow.
What? Oh, well, okay.
So you can either have all this amazing gorgeousness food that these guys are producing, which is incredible, or you could have half a dairy cow, because the dairy cow needs to graze about 1 acre, but then you need another acre to dry its food and preserve it for winter when you're feeding it indoors. So on 1 acre of land, you can have all that veg and fruit production. They were growing strawberries and like melons in their polytunnels. or you can have half a dairy cow, or you can have 2/3 of a beef cow. You can't have both. That's a choice. So I know what I would choose, So they're a great case study. Really, just blown away with them. And actually, Jay-Z featured them on that video Entrepreneur. I don't know, Jay-Z.
I've heard of Jay-Z. No, I know Jay-Z.
Yeah,
I haven't seen.
I'm not really a follower, but I did watch the video because Robert. They say at the end you see Robert going across in his tractor, and Robert and Michelle Sullivan from The Artisan Grower.
That's
Incredible.
so cool.
And they self-taught. They taught themselves from YouTube videos and books. And Robert told me actually before they started doing this, he had a bit of a mud phobia. He really didn't like mud, And then you see him going across his tractor, he's like covered in mud, So.
Oh, as you do.
Yeah.
We're coming on the tail end of the episode. There's so much we did cover. And look, there's so many more case studies on your website, and I think they're an absolute blast to read through. I read through them a few months ago when I first came across FFSFF. I think that's the right one. Yeah. I read through a bunch of them, and I think a few more were added when I was checking last week. But they're absolutely amazing to read through, and they're kind of a bit of like a feel-good story if you're in the mood for that kind of stuff. So we've obviously got your website, farmersforstockfreefarming.org. Is that the best place we can connect to you guys?
Yeah, I would say farmersforstockfreefarming.org. There's a contact us button on there if anybody wants to get in touch, and that'll go straight to my email address. So if you want to contact me, that would be a good way to do that too.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then obviously I do like to squeeze every little bit of wisdom out that I possibly can.
Oh dear.
Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with, a bit of wisdom that's helped you kind of grow and learn, or potentially something that you're super passionate that we didn't actually touch on? Please bestow us upon your wisdom, Rebecca.
Well, I think, I'm an animal rights activist at heart, and, yes, I'm extremely concerned about climate change. I'm concerned about human health, but I'm powered by the animals in my heart, and but I come from a farming background, worked on farms. Granddad was a butcher. So, never say never. You don't have to have all the knowledge to get out there and make a change. Some people say to me, oh, well, I don't know enough to talk to people, or, I don't know enough about that topic. But I think, just go with your passion, which is kind of what I've done for Farmers Stock Free Farming. I'm like, oh, I don't know, it's however many decades since I got my agricultural degree, and I don't remember anything, but just get out there and learn and ask questions, and you will connect with people who can help you and who want to be involved. So I'm not a believer in armchair veganism, that we all have to get out there and do something right now. Very powerful things to do are writing to your politicians, submitting parliamentary questions, keep asking, because we're going to need political will to shift at some point to do this. So, take a look at the website, share the website with your MPs, with your MSPs, chat to them about it, and keep on talking about it is what I would say.
Awesome. I totally love all of that, especially, the political side, because we definitely don't have enough vegans in positions of political power. We need more of them. Write letters, all of them. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation. I was really looking forward to it, and it definitely did not disappoint.
Okay.
Thank you once again for all the knowledge you've left on us. And again, the website will be in the show notes for anyone who wants to check out the website. And other than that, have an amazing day, Rebecca. We'll speak to you very soon.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to the end of the podcast episode. Thank you so much for listening the whole way through. I really appreciate you and the time you've given me. If you want to see or support Rebecca in what she does, I'm going to leave all the details in the show notes. She really does do amazing work. So thank you once again, Rebecca, for coming on and having this conversation that I think is vitally important. And I can't wait to see what ends up happening with all the amazing work you're doing in Scotland. If this episode landed home for you, To help us out, please share with a friend, family member, or colleague, or even your dog's uncle's pet, or however that will work. It really helps out and helps spread the word of how we can make an impact as individuals, as organizations, and any format that we do take in our position in society. That is all from me today. Stay happy, eat plants, peace.